So nice to have Amy here to ask these questions. Normally I just sort of wing it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll start with a centering, just a little bit of time to just be present and arrive here. And then I'll chat a little bit, we'll have time for questions, and then we'll chat to Amy about the work that she does and how that relates to soul babies and so on as well. Okay, so you can keep your eyes open or closed as you prefer for the centering. If they're open, just focus them in just gently focus them down on the ground or whatever is in front of you, a few feet in front of you. And breathe deeply all the way into your belly. As you breathe in, really take a moment to feel how it is in your body right now. So notice the temperature. Notice the air on your skin and the clothes on your skin. Notice where the body is holding tension, where it's relaxed. And then really begin to focus in on your breathing pattern. Because if there's one way for us to truly check in on how we're doing in terms of being embodied and landed in this body, one of the things we can do is look towards our breathing pattern. The interesting thing about breathing is we often think we breathe into the belly and the belly expands out on the in-breath, back towards the spine on the out-breath. And that's deep, slow, easy breathing. But there's more to the breathing than that as well. There's also the sense of, so there's the breathing, sort of diaphragmatic breathing down into the belly, but then there's also the breath in the side of the lungs. So feel as you breathe in, side of the lungs expanding. Notice how it feels if you breathe into the back of your body, because very often we forget to breathe towards the back of our body. And then breathe all the way towards the top of the lungs as well. Fill the top of the lungs with air. Just take a moment to notice how much more capacity you have to breathe than perhaps the normal pattern of breathing allows for. And then take a moment to consider how babies breathe. So of course they have to learn how to breathe initially. And when they're born, they're receiving oxygen through the umbilical cord. And there's this transitionary time where they're receiving oxygen both from the umbilical cord and from their lungs as the lungs start emptying of fluid. But generally, a baby's lungs are not constricted, particularly if we give them time to actually follow their own breathing process. Don't clamp the cord too quickly. Don't disturb this moment of arriving. Apparently, learning how to breathe for a baby is kind of feels a little bit like burning initially. But then there's also the sense that a baby kind of naturally knows how to do it if it's not disturbed. So take a moment to breathe now, maybe as if you were a newborn baby, where there are not yet barriers and constrictions and defenses put in place. Where the air fills the lungs in a very natural, easy way. And imagine for a moment that you are this baby that is having a quiet and very welcomed entrance into its little body, where it is seen, witnessed, loved, and held in sacred space that is undisturbed and spacious. Breathe as if you're that baby. And we're just going to sit in silence for about a minute while you, given space to simply watch your breath and to come back over and over again to the present moment. And then take one more deep breath all the way down into the belly, expanding the lungs in all directions. Bringing your awareness to your heart center, in the center of your chest. Really feeling the space between your shoulder blades at the back of your heart, of your back, behind your heart center, just relaxing and opening. Spaciousness in the center of the chest and the front of the chest. The lungs and the heart center very closely aligned to one another. We breathe in prana or life force. Prana means both breath and life force. And our heart reflects how much we allow that life force to be present in a way that we embrace it joyfully. And then just taking one moment before you open your eyes, or even if you do open your eyes, you can open them, just taking a moment to really connect to the others in the Zoom room with you today, so that we get a sense of all being together, present here. And that we come with a, I guess a sense of excitement about exploring a topic that I know is close to many people's hearts who are involved in birth keeping. Not only what happens physiologically, what happens emotionally, what happens cognitively, but also what happens at the deeper levels of consciousness. And what happens as this vast, unconditionally loving, deeply wise sense of self on a soul level actually comes into the body and lands in the body. So when you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes. And then I would like to not only welcome everybody here to this time that we're spending together, but also to welcome Amy. And for those of you who don't know Amy, which I'm sure are very few of you, because many of you have worked with Amy through Mama Bamba and so on, or through births, through being doulas. Just to say that Amy and I started working together. Well, gosh, I mean, I first met Amy when she was pregnant with her firstborn. How old is Noah now, Amy?
Turning 17 this year.
You know what I do remember? I do remember, I think this was you, I might be wrong, but I do remember that in the antenatal class, we did some dance to like birth dance, I think I called it, to really help people come into their bodies and to really help the couples kind of connect deeply and so on. And I can't remember if it was Amy's partner or not. At the time. It was. He just went, I'm never doing that again.
It was when I was pregnant the second time. He's like,
okay.
We can do anything you want. We can do another home birth if you want, but I am not dancing again.
There you go. Yeah. So much for getting into our bodies. So anyway, and then Amy trained as a doula. She did all sorts of different trainings and everything. And then we became partners in when? 2000 and is it 18, Amy? Is that correct?
That's when we started, yeah. And then officially 2020 probably.
Oh, okay. And it's been such a wonderful partnership. I just feel that so deeply supported by her, and I hope that that's kind of mutual as well. And it's become a really lovely friendship and so on as well. But what Amy does, besides training doulas for Mama Bamba, and besides attending births as a very, very, very wonderful doula herself, is that she is also a craniosacral therapist. And one of the things I'm really interested in chatting to her about today, although who knows where this conversation will go because it will just unfold the way it does, is something about how when we land in our bodies at birth or at 68, if you mean, sometimes it's a little bit delayed. It's there's a lot of kind of stuff that needs to unwind, or even just like from the birth itself, or from constrictions that happen in the period just after birth, maybe if the baby is removed from its parents or something like that. And then even there might be unwinding that needs to happen from what the baby was experiencing in utero and so on as well. And so that these are things that we can continue to release and let go of all the way through our lives, because all of us, every single one of us, have constrictions in our bodies. And there's no saying what causes these kind of traumas that create the constrictions, because somebody can have an intensely difficult birth physiologically and really not seem to carry much trauma afterwards, or a very easy birth but have a lot of trauma because there was a sense of not being emotionally fully supported. Or somebody can cruise through the first couple of years of life, and then, I don't know, their dad says something dismissive to them that is just thoughtless and really not a big thing at all. And it registers in their body as something incredibly traumatic that changes how they feel they are in the world. And so this process of landing is a process that carries on throughout life. And I think the thing that I'm really interested in is, because as you all know, I'm fascinated by this idea of, not this idea, this actual experience, this thing that occurs at birth, where the baby, or the soul of the baby that was not constricted to its body when it's in utero, once the baby is actually born, once it emerges, and it doesn't matter the method of delivery, whether it's born vaginally, whether it's born via cesarean section, but once the baby comes out into the air and starts breathing and so on, there's something you can actually watch very clearly. You can see that it becomes kind of enlivened with its soul. There's this sense of, and it's almost quite slow. It's not instantaneous like that, but there's this kind of moment where the body of the baby kind of becomes filled with its essence. So of course it's already alive beforehand and it's moving, but there's this kind of like this moment when the soul of the baby and the baby merge, whereas before the soul was free to move beyond the little body and so on. And so it's, how do we create the space where the baby can land in a way that that process doesn't get arrested? Because if it goes into shock in those first short amount of time, there can be a kind of like something not allowing it to move into its body. So that doesn't mean it stays like that, because babies are very malleable, and their brains are really plastic and so on. And so by plastic, I mean that there's a lot of possibility for undoing constriction and shock and so on. And so, we can just do skin to skin with the baby after it's born in order to allow any shock and so on to soften. Or there can be craniosacral work, or there can be, I'd love Amy to talk a little bit about babies unwinding in bucket baths. But the one thing I want to just add before we start, actually just checking in with you guys for questions, and also before Amy starts telling us about her experiences and so on, is that I'm just very aware of how, in order for a baby to land properly in its body, because it thinks that it is its parents, it thinks that it is everything, it thinks it's the air, it thinks it's the walls, and it thinks it's everybody, but because it's actually learning how it is to be in life through picking up the way its parents feel about how they are in life. So they might be loving the baby to the ends of the earth, But if they're not comfortably landed in their own bodies in a way that they can feel confident and joyful and loving towards themselves, the baby picks that up as part of its kind of instruction of how to be here. And so not only is it necessary for us to create the conditions for the baby to land safely, but we need to also look at how landed are we? How landed are we as birth keepers, as doulas, and so on, when we're in the birth room? How landed are we? How present are we in our bodies? How comfortably grounded are we in our bodies when we're welcoming these new souls into the world? So let me first come to you, Amy, and just have you reflect on that. And then let's open it up to if anybody has any questions that they would particularly like to chat about. And then maybe we can move on to specific things like the bucket bath or like the cranial work. And also, I'm really interested to chat to you about fascial holding, our fascia, and how they hold deep, deep, deep conditionings from pre-verbal spaces and so on.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, I think when it comes to how landed are we, how grounded are we as parents or as birth workers, particularly as mothers, I want to say, or as parents. I think it's so important because, and we've spoken about this before, but when babies have some kind of tension or trauma or tightness in their bodies, in their fascia, from a birth experience, from a womb experience, as you said, it can be really easy for them to release that. It can be really easy for them to move through that. Babies, human beings, are so incredibly wired to heal and to resolve what shows up in our bodies. But what we need is we need to be resilient. We need to have resilience. We need to have a space in which that healing is allowed. And if mothers, fathers, parents are not grounded, are not resilient themselves, they can't hold the space for the baby to process and unwind and release what they need to release from their system, if that makes sense. And I think this is why we can see some babies have an incredibly difficult birth experience, where you look at that and you think, wow, this baby must have so much to release from their system. But in actual fact, it's a fairly easy process when we do a session or two. And other babies who from the on paper have a fairly easy process, an easy arrival in the world, actually the smallest little hiccup can really throw them out, and we can end up having big reflux or colic or sleep struggles. And I always look to the mother, to the parents, because the resilience and the grounding and the safety that they have in their body reflects in how their babies land and process, if I'm making any sense.
You know, what it reminds me of is how often craniosacral therapists will work not just on the baby, but they also work on the parents as well. And working on the parents is often the thing that resolves the issue for the babies. So I think that mirrors exactly what you're saying. And I don't know if you want to talk about that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly right, because a very highly stressed parent, highly strung, worried about everything around their baby, I kind of feel like sometimes it can feel so pointless working on the baby, because the baby's really absolutely fine. They're just mirroring back to the parent what they're experiencing. So yes, absolutely, it can be really powerful to do that, to work on the parent. But obviously there's so much that birth brings up for us, right, in terms of our own inner child and our own birth experience and the space that was held for us to come into our bodies when we were born. So it does become more complicated, but Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. So, before we go any further into this, does anybody have any questions? And I think what I would ask is that you put one of those little handy things up, because then I can see, then you'll come up on my screen. If anyone has any questions that they, or any comments or any stories or any kind of sense of I don't know, inspiration or anything you excited about around this topic of how we help babies to land in their bodies, actually. Talia.
Sorry, I couldn't find the emoji hand, so I'm putting a real hand. Um, Robin, I'm curious because I know you also do a lot of work with people while they're pregnant and while baby's in utero. And I'm curious when you talk about this process at birth of the soul coming into the body and what you would say about the baby in utero and the growing body and their soul. And is there a merging process that's already happening in that time? Or do you really see it as like at that moment of birth is when soul and body really meet?
Thank you. It's an interesting question. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my perspective on it, because there are many different belief systems around this. And they really are at odds with one another, actually. So if you, for instance, look at the research that's been done by perinatal psychologists, and that's amazing, like really powerful, good research that is absolutely true. What they're mostly doing is very often, or certainly in the past, they were, I don't know how, I think that there is more kind of checking in with the actual baby these days, but certainly beforehand, when people started talking about birth trauma, it was very often the adults who were regressing back to their birth or their prenatal experience, and then recognizing how very difficult it was, and then expecting that that was actually the experience that they had when they were in the womb themselves. Or expecting that was the experience that they had, but expecting that that was how they actually experienced it when they were in the womb. And then if I do work with people on connecting to the soul of the unborn baby, and there's all sorts of, I mean, everybody comes with stuff that's going on, you know, so somebody can come and they're feeling terribly kind of guilty and kind of upset with themselves because the baby, you know, was conceived and it was not expected and it was a shock. And initially they actually really wanted to terminate, and they might have almost tried to terminate, but then they decided not to. And what kind of impact did that have on the baby? Or the partners split up and there's all this kind of emotional kind of stress going on, or somebody, you know, some trauma occurred during the pregnancy. And then when we check in, and so now what's important to say is that I'm not being psychic. Okay. And so I'm not actually kind of tapping into the baby and telling the parents what the baby says, because that's very disempowering. And I mean, you know, it's kind of, I might get it all wrong, probably would get it all wrong, actually. So it's much more authentic and much more valuable for me to hold space for the parents to actually get into a relaxed enough place that they can communicate directly with the soul of their baby through the process of using active imagination. And then what the baby always responds to them. So now this is from a parent who thinks that they've harmed their child somehow. You know, they come to see me because they're feeling guilty about whatever's happened and they're worried about the child. The child always says to them, I'm absolutely fine. I'm up here kind of observing it all, loving you like crazy, understanding exactly what you're going through, holding you with an enormous amount of compassion, and I'm cool. Don't worry about me. This is like an important kind of thing for you to look at it, what it means for you on a soul level and so on. So I kind of went, well, how can that be that the two experiences are so different? And then I was already aware of how when a baby is born, there's this very definite kind of moment of the baby. You can actually kind of see it coming in and suddenly kind of like, oh, here I am. And so I think, so this is just my idea of it. And then I'll also tell you about Rudolf Steiner, who I came across later on after I'd already kind of figured this bit out for myself, whether or not it's true, whatever, is that when they're in the womb, they don't have to be stuck in their bodies yet. They can live beyond the body. But then as soon as they're born, they no longer have that opportunity any longer. They have to be embodied once they're born. And so there's this process of coming into their body. And then the body has perhaps carried all that trauma. Maybe the trauma and the difficulties that it experienced were in the body of the baby in the womb, but the baby didn't have to be in the body, so the baby was cool. And then the baby's born, and then all of a sudden it gets to deal with it. But as we've already mentioned, it's very, very easy, or so much easier, for a baby to release that kind of constriction and defensiveness and boundariness than it is for us as adults, because we have our neuronal pathways are set, and it's very much more difficult for us to change how we feel about life and so on. And so then just to add one more thing is that Rudolf Steiner, he wrote a whole enormous amount, well, a fair amount, about the journey of the incoming soul. And so then he says, and I think many of you have already heard this story before, because I've certainly spoken about it in these Soul Baby webinars before. But what he says happens is that at the moment of conception, the soul of the baby kind of explodes out into what he calls the cosmic sphere, which on an archetypal level is kind of oneness consciousness. And then it gradually comes into what he calls the lunar sphere. Archetypally, that would be like almost like the subconscious, but it's not constricted into the body yet. And we can imagine it as far away as the moon in a way. And then slowly, as pregnancy progresses, the baby does move closer, but it doesn't actually fully come into its body until birth. So it was very nice for me to read that, because it was like, here's somebody else who is actually explaining what it was that I understood already. Yeah. So does that answer your question at all, Talia?
Yes, very much. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, and I appreciate that, how the baby's body is carrying that imprinting, even though the soul's not bound to it, and then that meeting at birth and perhaps takes it all on in that moment. So yeah, fascinating. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please do.
So what I find so fascinating is that makes so much sense from Robin's experiences with soul integration and unborn baby sessions. But then when we look at it from if we study embryology and we look at it from a craniosacral perspective, how the baby is literally swimming in the mother's fluid, first of all, the amniotic fluid that belongs to the mother. And when the notochord, which is the primitive early version of the spinal cord, seals, it traps umbilical cord, which becomes again traps amniotic fluid, which becomes the blueprint of our cerebral spinal fluid. Obviously, cerebral spinal fluid is regenerated every day, but the blueprint comes from the amniotic fluid of the mother that is then sealed in that notochord. So it's almost like yeah, we know the intelligence of fluid and the memory that can be carried in water. And so if we think of our nervous system, we think of the fascia, we think of the cerebral spinal fluids, the fluids between the fascia, which are very similar to cerebral spinal fluid. It kind of gives us an idea of how we can carry memories and experiences in our tissue in a very sort of tangible, visceral way. Which lines up absolutely with what you're sharing, Robin.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's really beautiful. Yeah. And I really love that idea of how we're formed, within the amniotic fluid of the mother. And that has huge implications, actually, as well. Yeah. Yeshvika has a message here. She says, "Hi, thank you for doing this work. How do you handle situations where a mother intuitively knows that something is wrong with their baby, i.e. baby does have a cancer, etc., and that will be quite jarring on a mother who feels that, and reactively that can look like she's destabilized, but that's because she knows something is wrong with her child. How do you handle situations like that, or if you have seen that? I would really appreciate this feedback. Mothers have such amazing ancestral intuitive wisdom." Okay, I'm not 100% sure that I altogether understand what you're asking, Yevshika.
Sorry. Do you want me to? Sorry, it's me, Ishvika. Sorry, apologies. I get very nervous to put myself on camera sometimes. So I don't mind giving a little bit of feedback or a little bit of explanation what I was trying to say there. If that helps.
Okay. Could you describe it again? That would be great. Thank you.
So I think so what I'm trying to say is that sometimes, I think just hearing what was said, and maybe I interpreted it incorrectly, but it was where a lot of the distress that's felt in a baby, or if there's a colic or some type of I don't necessarily want to say disease, but something that's showing up on a child actually has to do with either a distress or something that's coming from the nervous systems of the parents, or the mother, either or. So I just wanted to understand that, because I truly do believe in intuitive abilities that we have. We read energies of rooms as well, especially with mother energy and mothers as well. Those come online as well. So how are those situations typically handled, or if you've seen them in practice where a mother is coming, to a space saying something is wrong with my child, like I believe either there's a cancer, or there is something wrong, like it's either not sleeping, or he or he is not sleeping well, or there's something, and they know that it's not them per se, but it can look very distressing to the outside. It's almost like seeing reactive abuse, for example, seeing a reaction and thinking, okay, but I think it's because his mother is very, anxious, or but that's not necessarily true. It's just that the mother's just picking on her intuitive abilities of just knowing something is not quite right with her child. And if there's cases that you've seen, or because I know that in my personal realm, I just want to understand in this space if you've seen that, or how you handle situations like that.
Okay, thank you. Amy, shall I go and then you go, or you go and then I go? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think, it's such a tricky and emotionally sort of triggering kind of conversation, actually, because there's this thing of, okay, if there's something that is a problem with the baby that we think is actually related to something, the way that the parents are, or if the baby has an enormous amount of, say, colic or reflux, and you can see that the parents are very anxious, or the baby actually has almost like a physiological problem, does it stem from some kind of a traumatic experience, even in the womb or something? I mean, I have seen that. And so it's difficult, because then there's a sense of blame that can be associated with that. And we're not talking about blame at all. What we're talking about is when things are a little bit out of alignment, that there's a kind of a sense of tension or constriction or something that's going on. What we want to do is we want to look at all the different ways that we can help to relieve that. And sometimes those ways do include something of, what is it that I'm holding? Or, how did that enormous, huge argument that I had with my partner when we were 3 months pregnant and nearly split or something, how did that actually impact the baby? Even if it didn't impact the baby when it's in the womb, how did it impact the fetus, the actual body of the baby, and so on? And so I think that the thing is that what we do is, it's kind of quite empowering, is that we can actually look at what are the issues that we're carrying as parents, and how do we, with the most enormous amount of kind of kindness and generosity towards ourselves, and as birth keepers or birth support people, how do we assist our clients to find ways to just settle through whatever that constriction is? It might be an emotional constriction like anxiety, for instance. And when they do that, if there is a response in the baby that is positive, how do they then not blame themselves, but rather keep working with it so that it has a positive outcome? So it's kind of like, yes, all of these things are intimately interconnected, our emotions and our physiology and the dynamics between us and others, particularly babies and parents. I mean, the babies not only are picking up kind of like the mother's amniotic fluid, or what's going on with the partner, and the kind of impact that the emotional dynamic between the parents are holding, and so on. All of that, it's all kind of creates one whole. So the physical stuff is impacted by the emotional stuff is impacted by the physical stuff. The soul stuff is kind of not allowed to land properly because it's kind of, there's too much tension and so on. And so we just work with the entire field. And if we're working on ourselves, we work with our entire field as well. And even at the moment, I am, because I'm working quite a lot with this thing of landing in the body. And so as I do that, I kind of check in myself, where am I holding constriction in my body that is still from pre-verbal times? And as it comes up and as it starts releasing, it causes all sorts of physiological problems for me. And then I get to slowly, or psychological sometimes, slowly, gently, kindly kind of work through it. So it doesn't matter if we're doing it for ourselves or our babies. It's just an ongoing part of being human, I guess. Amy, that was long. I'm sorry, I went on for long.
I wanted to just come from it from a slightly different angle, and just say that, babies also arrive here on their own journeys, their own soul journeys, and that's deeply entangled with their parents' journey and their siblings and their family. It's also their own journey, and they have their own things that they need to process and work through and experience. And so, not everything necessarily ties back to the mother or the parent's nervous system, and not everything ties back to womb experience, or as a doula and also as a craniosacral therapist, I always really prioritize my clients' motherly intuition, and I would always validate that, even if I do even if I do think that she perhaps needs more nervous system support, or more support in general, and maybe whatever I feel, I would always want to guide her to more intuitively tune in with her intuition and what she feels her baby needs and what she feels her baby's trying to communicate to her, because our babies do communicate verbally with us, and if we can allow ourselves to drop into that, and again, how grounded, how landed we are in our bodies speaks to how much capacity we have to drop into that inner trust, that inner knowing, that space where we are open to receive what our babies are trying to communicate to us. So just speaking from your sort of example of a mother who's really feeling that there's something wrong with her baby and possibly not getting the support that she needs, I would help her with nervous system support and her baby to drop in so that she can become clearer and communicate and advocate more clearly for herself and her baby. I don't know. Yeah, that was just a different take on.
And so, Amy, do you have a story maybe about working with somebody around what they're holding, and then when they let go, how you notice it in the baby? Something like that.
Sure. I mean, there's so many stories like that. I'm trying to think of a very obvious one. Nothing's really coming to mind. Although I do have a lovely story. It's not quite aligned with that, but I did work with a baby once who had, and this is just again speaking to our babies being on their own journey and parents advocating for their baby, if that makes sense. I'm trying to think of I'll think of another story more specifically to answer your question. But I once worked with a baby who was probably about 4 or 5 weeks when he had a bad reaction to a vaccine. I think I saw him for the first time at 6 weeks, and this had happened a week or two previously. So he'd had a vaccine that day, come home, and then that evening had stopped breathing and gone blue, and his parents had rushed him to the emergency room. And it had been quite a traumatic experience, but obviously he was fine. He'd maybe spent one night or a few nights in the hospital, and came home. And after that, he refused to breastfeed, absolutely refused to breastfeed. And he had been breastfeeding successfully up till this point. And I did a bucket bath with him. And at 6 weeks, it's quite late to do a bucket bath. I like to do the bucket baths closer to in the first 5 to 10 days, usually around day 5. The bucket bath is a beautiful unwinding, a beautiful opportunity for the baby to go back into their birth space, and also just unwind the fascia in their body. So do we all know, should I talk a bit about, well, we can talk a bit later about fascia.
Maybe, okay. Or just explain what a bucket bath is, maybe.
Bucket bath. So a bucket bath is when I put the babies vertically into like a bucket. It's called a tummy tub in Europe, specially made bucket. And I just support them cranially, so supporting their occiput. And because they're in this bucket and I've got free range, I can move with their bodies in a 360 and allow their bodies to move in the way that they want to move. And it's a beautiful way for babies to do a full fascial unwind. So there are craniosacral therapists around the world, and particularly in Florida, who do craniosacral therapy in water, in the ocean sometimes. So it is very well known to bring in that water element, because it adds weightlessness for the baby's body, or for the body. And our fascia is made up of layers of this sort of spiderwebby kind of a membrane with fluid in between it that glides as moves, so just allowing the body to unwind in the ways that it needs to release any tightness in the fascia is a lovely reset. And I find all babies, whether babies are struggling with anything after birth, all babies benefit from a bucket bath, but particularly babies who are struggling with breastfeeding or discomfort or a traumatic birth experience. And this baby had a very, very big release in the bucket, like a big cry. And often it can be really hard to hold small babies when they're having a big release, because, you know, you want to give a small baby to their mother when they're crying. But this was such an obvious emotional release. And the mother and the father were right there with him. And it was such an obvious experience that we were all able to hold the most beautiful space for him to release. And after the big release, there was a lovely integration, which is when I find they go into a very smooth movement in the bath. And I put him skin to skin with his mother, and he latched and he fed. And we were all just absolutely ecstatic, because it had been this ongoing struggle. And as lovely as that was, unfortunately, it didn't last. He did latch for a couple of days, and then again went through a process of refusing the breast. And he would even refuse bottles. He didn't want to be fed. It was really, really interesting. He did not want to. Yeah, and so I did numerous sessions for him and for his mother, and we saw some improvements, and then we saw some setbacks, and it was a constant fight for this baby to feed. And it was really fascinating, because one of the stories in one of the sessions that came up for the mother was a story of a grandmother who had died just a couple of months before this baby was born. And she had been old, and she had lived a good life, and her husband had died, and she had decided she didn't want to live anymore, and she had eaten. And she had just gone on a fast, and then she had passed away. And it had been very peaceful, but it was a very conscious decision. And this mother was really struggling with why this baby was presenting with exactly the same patterning, you know. So yeah, it was such an interesting case, and we really had to go into the mother speaking out her worst fear, which is that the baby is in a way choosing this, and what does that mean about the baby's soul journey. And so often I find that speaking out these things, speaking out these fears, acknowledging these fears is just enough to dissipate. And they didn't have an easy journey. It was the first sort of, I saw him again when he was about 14 months, after seeing him regularly, you know, in those first 3 months. And there had been on a journey. It really wasn't easy. There wasn't like a quick solution. But when I saw him again, he was fully embodied. He had landed and grounded in his body at that point. But it can take babies a while to become fully embodied. And not wanting to eat is a very obvious sign. Like when our digestive system needs to be working in order to fuel our body, in order to ground us on this earth. And babies who are struggling to pick up weight, not wanting to latch, not wanting to feed, are often babies who are not well grounded in their bodies, and they either need time or they need support to do that. And this was an extreme case, but it was an interesting case in the sense of the mother's family journey and the sort of epigenetics or whatever soul journey, however you want to interpret it, alongside with the physical process that the baby's body went through after a traumatic event of just wanting to shut down. And I think so often we need to support our babies to ground after birth. And it's one of the reasons why I love the bucket bath, because it gives them the opportunity to go back and integrate anything that might have been disrupted or intervened with or disconnected in the birth process, and rewire that in their brain and in their body so that they can fully integrate the experience that they had. So it's
Thank
almost
you,
like
Amy.
a rebirth. Yeah.
It's a beautiful story, really lovely. Thank you. I just love how stories kind of make things so much more real and bring home what it is that you're talking about and so on. It's a really lovely one. And I also, I mean, I'm fascinated by the thing of how the grandmother, like the baby was already on some deep soul level, really understood this pattern in that the mother was holding about what she'd experienced from her mother. I don't know if it was a maternal grandmother or whatever, and that it knew enough somatically in order to be able to actually go, let's just carry on working a little bit further with that pattern, you know, as we do in life. How often we have an experience that is traumatic, and then we kind of like experience it over and over and over again in our lives until we actually work with the original trauma and kind of release it. And I'm also love what you were saying about how sometimes it's necessary to speak it out, because I think sometimes it's a really good thing just to almost allow the baby to hear, like actually to tell the baby what's going on. Even though, of course, the baby's not listening to the words, it's understand, you know, the verbal words. It's definitely picking up what's going on a non-verbal level, and how incredibly wise babies are in terms of pre-verbal communication, which is the communication of the imagination or of images and feelings and so on. And they're much more attuned to that than we are as adults, in the same way as animals often are as well. It's the same type of communication. And how we think that it's maybe even just something that happens that actually gets a communication going, but very often it's much deeper than that. It actually resolves kind of trauma, or it kind of brings healing, or it changes how we feel about ourselves and our own bodies and so on, using those kind of ways to access what's going on in the subconscious. And then through that also recognizing how we're so intimately connected with other people. So something can happen to me that I change how I feel inside of myself, in my subconscious, and then outside people respond to me in a different way, because I mean, in the most extraordinary kind of ways, like, you know, I mean, just a simple thing, like somebody could do a session where they really realize that they need to be following their passion in life or something like that. But they're in this boring job and they don't really have the confidence to leave it because they're worried about money or something, and then they'll get fired because they kind of know on a deep level that that's what they really need to be doing, but they need some help to get there somehow, something like that. So it's not really to do with babies, but there are many, many instances like that as well.
Yeah, and I think when we speak the stories to our babies, and this is particularly I counsel my clients to do this around their birth stories. If they feel like their birth was very traumatic for them, or even if not for them, for their baby, I always say, well, instead of projecting that, just speak the story to your baby. This is how I felt. I imagine this is how you felt. You must have felt this. I was feeling this. And just by speaking it out loud, you kind of use your voice to orientate yourself, to downregulate your nervous system, which in turn then impacts the baby, you know. And we're so good at talking to our babies when they're in our womb. You know, mothers are always communicating with their babies, touching their babies, but we kind of forget once they're born that we can carry on talking to them in that same way, and that it can be a reciprocal. You know, we can leave space for them to respond, and like you said, imagery. So paying attention to your dreams, paying attention to the images that come that are present around that time can be so powerful to feel a connection, that it's not just a one-way communication, and that whenever your baby cries or makes a noise in any way, they are trying, or they're not trying, they are communicating with you. It's just around whether or not we can stop and pause and ground and hear what they're trying to say.
Thank you. Okay, Eva, you said I need to leave in 10 minutes, and that was quite a while back, so I'm not sure if you're even here still. So if there's not, I will email you. But my question is about plagiocephaly.
Plagiocephaly, the flat head on the babies sleeping on their back.
All right, we have a lot of this in the USA. I've studied a bit of CFT, but curious to learn other modalities to support mother and baby. Amy, do you have something that
Yeah, I can talk a lot about that.
Okay, well, I'll leave it up to you then.
Yeah, so I mean, the first mistake we started making was, well, I actually don't even know where the first mistake was. But so a plagiocephaly is when babies develop like a flat spot on their cranium, so either on the back or on the side. And often what happens is, because there's a flat spot there, it becomes a comfortable space. So when you place the baby on their back, their head goes into that flat spot, and then babies will often develop. From plagiocephaly, they'll develop torticollis. So torticollis is a shortening of the neck muscles on the one side. So then you see babies that can't hold their heads up straight. And it's it's becoming more and more common. And it kind of has been ever since we stopped putting babies to sleep on their tummies. So I'm a huge advocate for tummy sleeping. I think it is so important for a baby's nervous system that they sleep on their tummy, that they have this relaxed fascial diaphragm around their thoracic fascial diaphragm can be relaxed when they're in that position. Their digestive system in turn is more relaxed because they have the support of the mattress underneath them. We don't need to swaddle them, because when they have their little Moro reflex, they have it and they feel the firm mattress, they're like, oh, I'm safe, and their nervous system down regulates. They need to integrate their Moro reflex. They need to experience that. But they need to then experience it, feel safe, and down regulate. What happened is there was an incredible amount of fear around putting babies to sleep on their tummies. I think it was in the early 90s, after a campaign, the Back to Sleep campaign, that was done in response to try to figure out why there was an increase in SIDS, sudden infant death. And the one common denominator they found was that all babies were sleeping on their tummies. But the reality is all babies were sleeping on their tummies, because in those days, pediatricians told mothers to put their babies on their tummy. So it wasn't really a key defining factor for SIDS. And there are various other things that we can talk about that are also connected there that weren't studied in that study. So we then started putting babies on their back. And we also started, and then we saw that the Moro reflex was a problem, because babies were waking themselves up. So we started swaddling babies when they were on their backs. And when we swaddle babies, again, as a craniosacral therapist, I really find a huge amount of tension in the thoracic diaphragm. And sometimes we even see babies with like little T-Rex arms, because their arms have been swaddled so much, they actually struggle to extend and to stretch out their arms. And that's an extreme tightness that we see in the fascia from being in these very restrictive positions. So I start with a fascial release stretches that I do with babies that are struggling with any of these symptoms. So even plagiocephaly, it depends on how early you catch it. So I have worked with older babies. So older, I mean basically walking already, so 12 months. And it can be quite hard then to get big changes, although we do see changes, and we are still able to impact the fascia. But if we catch it early, it's very, very easy to help that cranium round out, because everything is held in fascia. The fascia is the connective tissue that wraps around every single cell in our body. And every organ and every bone is encased in fascia. And as I said previously, the fascia is fluid filled, so it glides and it moves. And when we restrict movement, sometimes that fluid in the fascia becomes rigid and tighten. Maybe almost if there's disease or inflammation, it can become cement-like, and then that's where we see pain and a restriction in movement. So what we need to do is we need to help those that fluid in the baby's body to move and to be released, and for that fascia to glide again. And as the fascia releases, the cranial bones, which are held, with the dura, are given space to find their optimal capacity. And we want the cranial bones to find their optimal positions, because that creates optimal space for the brain to grow, right? We don't want to have restrictions or torsions there. So babies are so fluid and still so plastic, soft, that we can very easily encourage this kind of release. And I normally start with releasing the pelvis. So if you know about the central nervous system and the craniosacral system that we work with, it's almost like a jellyfish. It wraps around the brain, the fascia, and then down the spinal cord and anchors at the sacrum. And that's the dura that holds the central nervous system, the cerebral spinal fluid. That's what we work with as craniosacral therapists. But as an extension of that, the nerves flow out into the fascia around the body. So every time we release fascia in one area, it has an impact throughout the body, because it's one whole organ that holds us all together. So if you imagine that if we stacked our bones on top like a skeleton, it won't stand upright, right? It'll just collapse. And if we have our our muscles that help with movement, so muscles help one bone move and lift, though that's great, but it also doesn't hold us in 3D form. It's the fascia that wraps around everything that actually creates the 3D shape that we're in. So you can imagine that if there's a tightness in the fascia here, say in the shoulder, it can pull all the way down to the right hip, all the way down to the right baby toe, possibly, because of how the fascia articulates through the body. So when there's a flattening on the head, often there's a tightness in the fascia. And as we release the fascia, we create space and allow that cranium to round out. So I have there's some lovely videos on my Instagram page, Craniosacral Baby Clinic. And I also, there's an incredible craniosacral therapist in the US who I've learned so much from, Laurie Hendrickson, and she also shares incredible videos around plagiocephaly and how to facilitate release to help improve that. So
Thanks, Amy. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So then the one thing, so maybe I would just also be interested to hear, because it's kind of practical and so on. I mean, I do know that apparently another place where from birth we do tend to hold constriction is around our umbilicus. And so what would you do in order to help people, adults or babies, kind of release that sort of deep fascial tension? Let's just take around the umbilicus as an example. I mean, it could be anywhere, I guess.
So, I mean, babies are so lovely to work with because they're so small and it's so easy for them to release. So, you can work just for a couple of minutes on a baby and see an improvement. Yes, they might tighten up again because it's a patterning, in a couple of hours. They might need regular sessions. And that's why I run the baby clinics, because then I can teach the moms the fascial releases that they can do at home. So they don't have to see a craniosacral therapist every week or twice a week. They can see you once a month and do the stretches in between at home. So when it comes to like the umbilical, I mean, look, fascia, again, particularly in babies and in adults, but it depends. In adults, it can vary so broadly how tight that and how easily that fascia is to unwind. But in a baby, so often the fascia just needs an invitation, just needs an invitation. So I find like holding and, because babies are so small, you can put your whole hand and you can kind of cover their sternum bone, which sort of supports which kind of touches on the fascia that wraps around the thoracic and the digestive system, and your hand can be on the umbilicus, on the abdomen, and you can really I like to have one hand on the front and one hand on the baby's back, and really give some gentle pressure and gentle sort of tractioning down towards the baby's nappy. And that kind of just really invites that fascia to lift. Also around the umbilicus, you might find that that tightness and the holding. I mean, on an emotional level, I might say that it has something to do with the disconnection from their mother and from that safe space, maybe even not from the mother, but from wherever they were before they were here, right? And as we disconnect from that, some babies might find that traumatic, others might not. Again, as we spoke about earlier, you know, each of us experiences that very, very differently. So when there's a tightening there, I would say it often on an emotional level, and this would differ from baby to baby. I would have to feel into the baby and hear their story to really understand. But just speaking generically, it might be a tightness and a sort of contraction response to something that happened in that separation. And in that, like, oh, I'm kind of my own on my own, because that's what that represents, right, in so many ways. So just a gentle holding and inviting that fascia to release. So when fascia gets tight and sticky, it sticks to bones and to organs. Instead of flowing around and holding, it becomes sticky and tight. So you can imagine, like in a baby's digestive system, there's small little sphincters and little valves. And if the fascia that wraps around there is tight, it's not going to allow those sphincters and valves to optimally move and optimally function. So we want to invite that fascia to release and to open it for more fluid. So the things that help invite fluid and flow is pressure and the invitation with your hands to release and allow more flow, and then also vibration. So I love tapping. So just tapping on a baby's intercostals, so along the intercostals, along the pectoral girdle, even around the pelvis, and up gently to the umbilicus could really help to create more flow in that area, and help the baby release. But then I would do something like that alongside what we spoke about previously, orientating with your voice, speaking to the baby about what they might be experiencing. If I was working with an adult, it would be quite similar. I would also hold the sacrum and hold the umbilicus, and just see what the body showed me that it needed in terms of unwinding, right? Mm-hmm. Unwinding in adults can be tricky because we're quite patterned in a lot of ways. So sometimes if you go to a craniosacral therapist that works with unwinding and really allows your body to move and unwind, it can feel amazing, right? You can be like, wow, that was incredible. I feel so much lighter after that session. But if you keep going back and you keep doing the same, it's almost like that's your patterning process, and it's so easy just to go into your patterning. So sometimes like a skilled craniosacral therapist might not always move to unwinding. You might actually just want to hold the system still and kind of allow the system, sort of gently nudge the system to figure that out itself. So there's a place for unwinding, and then sometimes not so much, because it can, for adults who are more patterned and more familiar with the patterns, we'll always just find the simplest way, right? Oh, it's so easy. I just go here and I have a little unwind and I feel better. But we're not dropping down to the core problem. Whereas in babies, they don't have that patterning yet. They're still quite soft and fluid. So a little unwinding is a beautiful way to release.
It's so interesting to me how much of what you're talking about we do intuitively as well as parents. Maybe not the tapping so much, but certainly that kind of sense of holding and kind of like deep breathing and kind of being in our own space and stuff like that. And then the other thing that it just reminded me of is that as I'm really creating this whole program about what I call the lost art of landing, how do we as adults relearn how to land in our bodies and so on. Part of the way that I'm learning how to create the program is through dreams that I have. So I have dreams that actually show me what's really important to incorporate into the program. And quite a number of the dreams, very unexpectedly, and when I have the dreams, I don't think that they're anything to do with the program, and then only in retrospect I go, oh, okay, that's what this is about how much I or we as people generally, it doesn't just mean adults, adults and babies and children and everybody and old people and everything, how much we need touch and how much we long for that kind of sense of actual physical holding as well as kind of being seen and listened to and heard and everything. But just that kind of sense of, actually, I'm here, just what you're talking about. And so you're talking about it, and I'm going, there you are, kind of repeating the things that I was being shown in my dreams, is that if I want to land in my body, or if I want to really encourage parents to land in their bodies before their babies come, how that process is facilitated so much by actually holding, and not just emotional holding, but physical holding as well, because of the fact, and I'm not talking about kind of hugging and dancing and so on. I'm really talking more about how as babies we're supposed to be held close, and then, you know, if that doesn't happen, it sets up a pattern that needs to be kind of overcome by almost regressing to what it is that we need as babies, which is the holding, really. So that's fascinating. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mm. Does anybody have, we've got 9 minutes left. Does anybody have anything more that they would like to ask about? That was really interesting, Amy. Thank you. And if you can do the emoji thing, then I think it's easier to, because then you come up on the screen.
Yes. Hi. I'm Manik. I do not working with babies, but I follow this webinar for myself because there was a lot of trauma in my on my birth. So my mother, she want to make an abortion. An abortion, yes. So I don't feel safety, and I have never had it. So now I am 58 years old, and during several years I'm looking for how can I change, because I had an infantile breath from and it was stopped here. It was not to my sorry for my English, it's not so good, but I understand a lot what you say and what you speak about it, that it's very, very important for babies, but also for yes, parents, also other people like me. You can change it, and I do a lot of what you say, Amy, with the hands on your body, and also tap. So I followed several years fascia therapy, EMDR, eye movement, so a lot of therapy. But I'm conscious about it, and the conscious about it is also very important. How do you do it? How do you it's not a mechanical thing that you are busy with it or you take it, but it is with sense, with a lot of sense, that it is very, very, very important. So that's a little bit of my story. I do not either. Not, I do not know also who is my father, so that's also biological. I do not know. So it's a long search of my identity. Dus my body was trembling like that inside of me. And we had to do a lot of fascia therapy, osteopathy. Uh, but now, the last years, 5 years, I can say it changed my life. It had very changed my life, and I feel like I will be younger and younger and younger instead of older and older and older because I feel it on my body. Uh, there was a lot of block freeze, and so I just will, yes, I will say this. I appreciate very much what are you doing and what with also with this webinar because we can help a lot of people with that. Mhm. Thank you. Mhm. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much, Annick.
Mhm.
Do you maybe want to respond first, Amy, and then I will respond?
Mhm.
So I do think that, you know, the one thing I just want to say, and thank you so much for sharing your story. That was generous of you to show us something of where you are and where you've been and so on. And the one thing that I'm so aware of, Annick, is how it's almost like the ways that we identify our soul purpose in life is, from my perspective, there's two pathways to it. And the one is to really follow what it is we're passionate about. So maybe I'm passionate about learning craniosacral therapy or something, and I just want to do that, or dance, or whatever, painting, something, whatever, and you just kind of follow that. And then the other way, which is equally valid and as powerful, is to look at, so the one is the kind of the joy and the passion, and the other one is to look at where is the biggest wounding that we've experienced in life? Because in order to fulfill our soul purpose, we have to experience the opposite of it as well. So if we have big amounts of like really powerful experiences that are difficult to deal with, it's almost like on a soul level, what we're doing is we're saying, gosh, I have this yearning and this like really big intention to make something magnificent out of my life. So I kind of experience the opposite so that I really know how to become that person and so on. And so then I was just so aware of it when you're talking about these tremendously difficult experiences that you had that kind of did this to you to allow you to kind of go, wow, actually the potential that I have to move forward is so much bigger than somebody who's just living a castles in the air existence. And I think Khalil Gibran said something very true about this, where he said that the further that you draw the bow back, the further ahead the arrow shoots. So it's the same analogy, actually. You know, the deeper the wounding, the more potential we have to really make something magnificent out of our lives. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you.
Did you want to add, Amy? We have a minute.
No, you summed it up beautifully. I also just wanted to say thank you for sharing, because it is, this work is really powerful, and it's beautiful to see that it can have an impact even when we do only find our way to it much later. It's beautiful to be able to work with babies, but not all babies are ready, and not all parents are ready for their babies to experience that. And so the fascia holds so much memory, and we can tap into it and release it and work with it throughout our lives. So it was a beautiful testimony to that.
And once again, just thank you to everybody for joining us today. And yes, I look forward to these webinars, because there's always sort of such interesting information that comes out. through kind of conversations and questions and everything as well. So thank you.
Yeah,
And
thanks for having
see
me.
you next time. And thank you,
care,
Amy,
everyone.
so much. That was lovely, really fascinating.
Lovely to see familiar faces and new faces. Have a lovely evening.
In the stop recording.